What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas, your host, once again, bringing you another edition of the Thomas Take. What a day it has been. January 29th, 2018, Monday. Per usual, I like to get off to a start on Monday with an MMA Monday, but there are a lot of stories in MMA to cover, and this will be one of the longer shows, to say the least. I think this will be one that people enjoy, that people will be able to tune into and say, hey, he gave his take on plenty of big topics inside the sport of mixed martial arts. None bigger currently than what took place last night in the ring, in particular the WWE ring. The first Women's Royal Rumble took place, and for those of you that have always tuned into the show, I rarely talk about professional wrestling. I'm not as big of a fan of it as I used to be. The quote-unquote attitude era with guys like Stone Cold, guys like Dwayne Johnson. Not really as into it as much as I was back then. And obviously I was a kid back then. I was fitting to their demographic, whereas now, 25 years old, soon to be 26, I'm not as into the theatrics of it as I used to be. Mega, mixed martial arts fan, mixed martial arts writer, covering the sport and talking about the sport on this podcast has been something that I really enjoy ever since I really started watching MMA. I left the WWE kind of in the rearview mirror, and that was, 1999, 2000, 2001, area, somewhere around there. So, obviously the biggest news of today in terms of the WWE mixed with mixed martial arts is the fact that it was the first women's Royal Rumble, where there were rumors for a long time that former UFC bantamweight champion, women's bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey would be making her debut last night in this Royal Rumble, would be making her first appearance in the WWE, and she did. And I want to give my take on it, and people can kind of take it for what it is. Sometimes my opinion is my opinion, and sometimes it's not, as nice or as sugar-coated as what some people would want me to say. But I always keep it real. That's my motto. I always keep it real. And I want to preface all my statements tonight by saying that, when Ronda Rousey first, got into the quote-unquote, mixed martial arts limelight, I've followed her since the beginning of her career, being a sport, a fan of the sport of mixed martial arts for as long as I have been. I remember how her career started. I remember how she became what she became. Fighting Miesha Tate back in the Strikeforce days, which was run by Scott Coker, who's currently the Bellator promoter, Bellator president right now. Miesha Tate was the biggest name in women's MMA outside of Gina Carano and Cyborg. And Miesha Tate, as a 135er, was, really dominant. And Ronda Rousey was winning all these fights by armbar. I saw her fight on an undercard. I remember seeing her fight. I think it was on a Nick Diaz show. Nick Diaz was the main event, and she was the undercard. And she was just submitting everyone in her path. And I thought, this girl could be a really big star. She looks good. She looks the part. She fights hard. She finishes fights. She could really be something, and that's what happened. She continued to win, continued to destroy. She had these title defenses after title defenses after title defenses in the UFC after beating Miesha Tate to win the Strikeforce Bantamweight Championship. Those fighters merged with the UFC. When Strikeforce, fell apart, those fighters kind of were absorbed by the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So she was able to really build off of that victory over Miesha Tate and enter into the sport of mixed martial arts with all this acclaim, all this hype. And really, I can go back to prior to her mixed martial arts days, the reason why she had this, fame was because of the fact that she was a silver medalist in the 2008 Olympics in judo. And she was somebody that, obviously, I believe actually she might have been bronze. I'd have to look that up. But she medaled in judo in the Olympics. I know that for a fact. And she was somebody that she won the bronze she won the bronze in Beijing, and she won the silver in Rio de Janeiro. She won the gold in the Pan Am Games in Rio de Janeiro. She won the gold in the Pan American Championships in 04, 05, silver in 06, and bronze in 07. So she was a true, Olympian champion, Olympian judoka, practitioner, and she had all that in her career. She's an Olympic judo, Olympian medalist, whatever you want to call it. And then she goes to becoming this mixed martial arts fighter that's winning via armbar, that's hip tossing people, using her judo background to win her mixed martial arts fights. It was the perfect transition from her discipline to mixed martial arts. And she had the title defenses, and I'm going through this because, going through from start to finish, because not many people really understand Ronda Rousey's career. They don't really know much about it. For the people that are tuning into this podcast that know that I'm a huge mixed martial arts fan, that are big WWE fans, which there are some out there. There's a lot out there that listen to this podcast. They might not know the, career that she has had. And she really was a trailblazer. I can honestly say she was a trailblazer. She did so much for the sport of mixed martial arts. She brought women to the forefront of MMA, and UFC President Dana White was so against it for so long that her career really gave him the thought of maybe this could actually work. Her success was what made Dana White decide on the fact that, hey, maybe I can do this, and that's what he did. So she comes in the UFC. She's actually brought up as the UFC champion, being that she was the last Strikeforce Women's Bantamweight champion. She was promoted up to the UFC's Women Bantamweight champion. They held a huge press conference for her. They said she's mean, she's nasty. She was getting a lot of promotion. And then, she was winning her title fights. And this is somebody that her story, is truly amazing. Her father, had his own issues. He committed suicide. She dropped out of high school. She earned a GED. She grew up with practically nothing from Southern California. Her mom was a world Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, world champion. And she had her heart fully invested in this, fully invested in fighting and competition. And she also wanted to be, the next big thing. And everything that she had, she grabbed. She went after. So I want to go through her fight record here, and I'm trying to find it as I'm on the laptop here. I want to go through her fight career record, fight by fight, record by record, win by win, so to speak. So, coming off this Miesha Tate victory, she was only 5-0 at the time of the Miesha Tate victory. She defended her title versus Sarah Kaufman, her last title defense in Strikeforce. UFC 157 was February 23rd, 2013. It was the first night that Rousey was in the UFC, and it was also the first female fight in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So here we are 5 years later almost. 5 years ago was the first women's mixed martial arts fight. And I'm going to touch back on that as the podcast goes on. I'm going to do multiple parts on Ronda tonight because I really want to let the listeners know how I feel about this. So she fights Liz Carmouche. She almost got submitted, but then she submitted Liz Carmouche via armbar. She fights Miesha Tate again. She submits Miesha Tate via armbar. She fights Sarah McMahon and TKOs her with a body shot. So we start to see her boxing somewhat develop. We see her fight Alexis Davis, who she hip-tossed and knocked out, in sort of a headlock. We saw her one-punch knockout Betch Correia. So she was finishing her fights one by one by one by one by one. She had finished every fight in her career up until that point. None of her fights had gone to decision. And then on the fateful night that was November 15th, 2015, UFC 193, she carried a 12-0 record into that bout, facing multiple-time world boxing champion Holly Holm. She was a massive favorite, but to take myself through that time, I remember thinking, this is a true mixed martial arts fight, other than Betch Correia, Alexis Davis, Miesha Tate. I also forgot to mention Kat Zingano. Kat Zingano was in between the Davis and Correia fight. So, Kat Zingano kind of charged after her, which was just a huge mistake on her part, and proceeded to get submitted. So, she's winning all these fights, and then she fights Holly Holm. And this was the first case where I thought, not to take anything away from her previous opponents, but a world boxing champion. We all know what happened with that. Holly Holm picked her apart, piece by piece, second by second, embarrassed her, and made her look average. When at no point in the career of Ronda Rousey did she look average. Not at any point prior to that, because she's finishing all of her fights, she's dispatching every opponent, and she's taking out Holly Holm. And there's a few things that I want to mention about Holly Holm, the Holly Holm fight. That fight was in Melbourne, Australia. It was originally scheduled to start the 2016 calendar year. Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit was originally scheduled for November, but Robbie Lawler was hurt, and they swapped the fights. They asked Ronda, could she fight sooner to end the year, on the November card, so to speak, and she said yes, she accepted. So she took the fight sooner than she was supposed to, and I'm not making an excuse for her, but that was pretty admirable because she knew that was probably the toughest test in her career at that point. And Holly Holm destroyed her. I mean, people can talk about the knockout, how it was a huge head kick and everything, but watch the fight from start to finish. You will see complete and total domination in every which way. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was part one of OCTAGONE. Ronda Rousey joins the WWE. I'll be right back. I'm going to give my take, continue the Ronda Rousey talk.